Over here, Bruce Milne is the director of the Sustainability Studies program here on UNM campus and also a professor of biology. He will be giving a conceptual overview of resilience, and then his presentation will be followed by Nelson Carrasquillo speaking about resilience in the workplace with a focus on migrant farm workers. After that, we'll hear from Mike Smolin, who will be talking about mosquito management, specifically without pesticides, and I think also speaking about your work in education and research on watershed management and water quality. No? Okay, just mosquito. Okay, all right. After that, we've got Richard Brandt, who is at the South Valley Academy here in Albuquerque and is the Dragon Farm. And then lastly, we'll hear from Kara Bobroff, who works with the Native American Community Academy. So each of these speakers will present a little bit of information on how their work fits into this overall concept of resilience. So I think we'll do about 10 to 12 minutes per speaker, and then we'll have about half an hour afterwards for question and answer session and some discussion among the group.
Thanks, Jessica.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thanks for coming. Nelson and I actually were in the wrong room for a while, wondering, why aren't they here? And so it was a very unresilient sort of start. But anyway, I prepared some material that's an overview of the concepts of resilience as I understand them in the context of sustainability. And as you'll see, these are concepts that have been percolating up for about a decade, thanks to people like Buzz Holling and Brian Walker and Carl Falk and other people. So it's meant to create some concepts, some definitions, so that we can move forward from there in our discussions. And I don't know why maybe the lights, there was a lot of fading.
Is that better?
This projector is not happy, but lately there have been reviews published in prominent journals that forecast doom and gloom, you know. They say that if we have some kind of global forcing factors that range from low values to high values, this might be something like human population size getting bigger and bigger, and then we look at some measure of the global ecological state, for instance, the percentage of ecosystems that are heavily affected by people. I know what it is. There's a color gun missing on the projector. That's why this color's gone. Anyway, you know, the notion is that as we force the system to higher and higher levels of expectation to serve more and more people, you know, upwards of 8 billion people or so, there's a hypothesis that we could reach a so-called tipping point, a threshold, where the system would suddenly collapse into some other world. And last night, Arturo Sandoval was talking about that prospect, that with collapse of oil and things like that, we'd suddenly find ourselves in sort of a medieval state where we'd have to rely on each other in a cooperative fashion, and there would be a new way of living for whoever was left. Okay, so this doom and gloom prospect is something that comes from a long history of people thinking about so-called tipping points and thresholds and collapses and things like that. Well, resilience is the antidote to this. It's like, how do we keep ourselves from hitting the tipping point and collapsing? So the next slide then is simply this. I'm going to talk about these concepts, set up some vocabulary words for us to be using. I'm going to, at the very end, touch on actually an 8-page little workbook that I've put together. If you wanted to take this kind of material home and do these fun exercises to discover some of the diagnostic tools and tactics that you could use to accomplish resilience planning in any context, if it's in your community or healthcare or soils or whatever. All right, so here's the big concept map for what I'm going to talk about. We are given a system that we live in that has certain attributes and dynamics, certain kinds of rules about how it behaves. There may be thresholds or tipping points that are inherent in the system, and what we really don't want to do is run into one of those things. It's like falling through a hole in the floor. You know, you don't want to hit that tipping point. It may be there, it's just you haven't found it yet because you haven't pushed the system hard enough. Systems like that have long and short-term behavior. They have cycles, there's multiple time scales, there's interdependence and memory and feedbacks and all of those things that are parts of complex systems. those are the kinds of systems that have these thresholds. And the system has resilience or not. And that's where we come in. We have the intention of trying to increase the resilience of a system like this so that we can avoid the tipping point. And we do that by enhancing diversity, biodiversity, by learning things, by cooperating with each other, and so on. So the idea is that we live in this kind of system. There is resilience to some extent or not, I'll define that. And then a shock may come along. You know, pesticides hit the environment and things respond. They could either recover from that, in which case, thanks to the resilience, they're able to recover. If they don't have sufficient resilience, you'll hit the tipping point and collapse. So that's the concept. And I want to now delve into those different concepts. And here's some examples from Brian Walker's work. You can read about this. There's some kind of ecosystem state variable, and two specific examples, and some measure of the ecosystem services. There are two different systems, A and B. They both have this sort of collapse behavior at some point when they hit a threshold, and then they find themselves in a new state. So one example is if we had system A represents a rangeland ecosystem where it provides some services that we can measure, like the amount of wool or meat that's being produced as a function of the woody vegetation biomass. So if we have nice grasslands, the sheep are happy and they give us a lot of services, but if the brush accumulates through the process of desertification, we hit a critical point and the system collapses and we can't raise sheep there anymore. Another example would be a lake. So if you have a lake and it's providing recreation and swimming and sport fisheries, things like that, and then you load the system up with phosphorus, it's a pollutant, eventually it reaches a critical point and the place turns into green soup and nobody wants to go there and it collapses. Okay, so that's what we mean by a threshold or a tipping point. Next. And then the resilience part comes in as a question of how well can the system respond to a shock or some kind of insult like that. So here we're looking at time going along, and this is the level of functioning. In this case, they're talking about children. This is where resilience has been applied in a psychological context. So the kids have a level of functioning that's quite normal, and then some kind of adversity hits, family strife or some kind of insult. Well, the kids' functioning decreases for a little while, and then there's a question of, are they resilient? Well, if they're resilient, they're going to come back and eventually get back to the regular functioning level they were at before. That's what resilience means. You take a hit and you come back to that level. Or if you're not resilient, you take the hit and things get worse. You succumb to this new regime that's just not healthy. And then there's other kinds of compromise situations. Or perhaps, you get a shock and you actually learn from it and you come back stronger. You're thriving. So in the psychological realm, they think of that. So resilience is this ability to rebound from a shock. And that basically also means we can only talk about resilience in the context of the shock. Are we talking about like a snowstorm that hits Albuquerque and shuts down the expressways and food can't come into Albuquerque? And when that happened a couple of years ago, we had a big snowstorm. And after about 3 days, the grocery shelves were getting kind of skimpy. That was about the size of a shock, like a 3-day shock that we could stand in this city without running out of food. So resilience planning really requires that we specify what is the shock, how big is it, how long is it going to last, and then we can assess whether it's resilient or not. Okay, next. And I thought I'd bring in some empirical examples because this has been studied in different ways. Let's take our friendly yeast. Yeast turned out to be a great experimental system for studying resilience. They like to live in little clumps. They do better when they're in little clumps, so there's kind of a cooperative nature to them. And what experimentalists have done is to force the yeast to live in like high concentrations of sugar as a food source, and then they dilute it. And as they dilute it, they're pushing the yeast towards the tipping point, and eventually if it's too dilute and there's not enough food, the yeast will collapse and reach that critical tipping point. So what they've done is they've watched yeast for a few days. It's great because you can do a whole lifetime experiment with yeast in about a week. And you just measure how many yeast there are in the bucket, and you start them all off like this, but some of the cultures are growing at high food levels. They have lots of food available. Others are growing at low amounts of food. And then when you hit them with a shock, like you inject salt into their environment, they hate salt, the ones that are happy and well-fed rebound from the shock. They come back to where they were before, so they're resilient against that shock. Whereas other populations that are growing in skimpy food situations are hit with the salt shock and they fail, they collapse, and they go extinct in that population. So this demonstrates that the resilience can be built into a system. You can make them resilient by giving them enough to eat, obviously, and if you don't give them enough to eat, then when they get hit with the shock, they collapse. So this is a demonstration, and the excellent paper just came out last year about this. I recommend the paper. And I won't belabor this, but if you look around, you can find ways to measure resilience. So here's time, here's some response. System starts like this, and it gets hit with a shock, so it starts to decrease in its performance. And then you can follow it as it recovers, and by measuring the difference between where it started and the bottom that it hit, or where it was performing compared to where it's performing now, you can measure that difference and plug all those into this index, and then you have a measure of resilience. So I'm just bringing this out to show you that there are ways to actually quantify resilience as it's been done in soil systems. And in other soil systems, there's a lot of concern with resilience. And the take-home message is that if you have an agricultural management situation, you could look at it in terms of sort of standard practice, where we leave soil bare, we have heavy machinery compacting the soil, intensive tillage, monoculture, acidification of soil, use of pesticides. All of that leads to decreasing population diversity in the soil. A lack of resilience will result. Whereas if you apply organic practices and crop rotation, and you're really smart, and you're basically diversifying the plants and diversifying the organic amendments and the crop rotation strategies and everything like that, it leads to an increase in population density and resilience. So diversity looks like it's a key thing for putting resilience into a system. And this is a famous paper by Worm and some other colleagues that reviewed the effects of diversity in ocean systems. And in every measure, diversity helps. So for instance, if you look at the ability of a fishery in the ocean to recover from overfishing, as a function of the number of species in that system, there's a significant effect that as you increase the number of species of fish in the system, it's able to recover better after it's been overfished, after it's had a shock. And all of these regression lines are going in different directions, but they all tell us that diversity is a good thing in terms of resilience. All right, there's another aspect of resilience thinking that Buzz Halling has brought in from ecology, and that is that systems have cycles at multiple time scales. So most of us could go out in the woods and find a little clump of plants. That little tiny patch of plants would be there. And then we could look up, kind of more broadly, and we'd see a whole tree fall that's fallen through the forest and creates a light gap in the forest. And if we look at it from space, we might see a whole mosaic of vegetation types across the state, representing different cover types like pine forest, maple forest, grasslands. And then across the world, there are these things called biomes, deserts, forests, and so on. They live in different climates. Well, the point is that these small little things usually cycle around really quickly. They don't last very long, whereas these bigger things get slower and more persistent through times. And they're all layered on top of each other, right? There's little patches of vegetation in a desert, in a forest. There's different vegetation types in the Arctic tundra versus the tropical rainforest. All of these things are multi-layered, multi-cycling, going on at different time scales. And it's also true in social systems, where if you look at the number of people and the time that an organization lasts or some phenomenon lasts, you find that when there's relatively small numbers of people, the phenomenon lasts a short time, like a fad, a cultural fad, whereas if more people have a certain set of values that they share, those values persist longer in time, or at some point we actually talk about traditions, cultural traditions and things like that, that involve many, many people that last a long time. So there's this kind of, conglomeration of cultural, sociological aspects, some of which are very short in duration, faddish, Others are really long in duration, cultural. So resilience thinking tries to bring this in the following way. This is a very famous thing called the lazy 8 diagram. And what it tries to do is to relate systems along a spectrum of connectedness, like how well connected, organized, tightly coupled are they, going from low coupling to high coupling, and then here the potential for that system to function. And you follow this lazy 8 by following the arrows. So down here is what's called the exploitation phase. This is sort of like early succession, after a volcano erupts and the land is all black, there's nothing there. There's nothing there to be connected, and there's very little potential for growth or anything like that. So it's in kind of an exploitation phase. That's when weeds do really well. Then, as time goes on, there's feedbacks that change the soil, change everything. The system ends up in the right-hand corner, kind of a late succession situation. And K is just a symbol for, carrying capacity in a mature population in ecology. And I would say that's like a bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is a very super connected thing with lots of potential to do things, and it tends to get locked and frozen in place, and it doesn't really want to, give up control of the system. And eventually, bureaucracies might collapse. And when we saw the Soviet Union collapse, that was a good example of a great big bureaucratic thing that fell apart. And then it goes into kind of a release phase, and then it cycles back up through this reorganization. So actually, the fall of the Roman Empire didn't, really kill that many people off. They all kind of reorganized and became other entities and so on, and went through a reorganization phase like this. And Holling's argument is that this is a natural way of systems that are existing in multiple scales in time and in space. And finally, this sort of poetic version of it that he and Lance Gunderson have put together, where you have a lazy 8 like this, it's on focus level. And if you have a subgroup within the system that's operating at faster time scales, and I'd like to think maybe of the Occupy movement, kind of a small organization like this, but they were in a part of their own phase, but they could influence the bureaucracy that exists at the dominant establishment part of society like this. And then there's yet another upper level context within which even this part of the system is embedded. And for instance, there could be a longer term, more persistent things such as cultural values and things like that come back and inform parts of this other cycle through a process of remembering. So, when we have information in encyclopedias or historical documents, those memories are still at work informing us at some current level of activity, and then we have other sort of instigators in our society that are able to revolt and cause some kind of disruption here that wiggles the system a little bit so that it can find a new kind of solution to things. All right, so I covered a whole bunch of those concepts, right? The threshold business is really important. The idea of tipping points. The idea that you can have resilience inherent in the system, and we can enhance resilience by embracing diversity, bringing in more ways of being a fish in the ocean, being more ways of being a microbe in the soil, more ways of being a seed by having genetic diversity in the crops. So all of those things add to resilience and make the system able to respond in a good way when it does get a shock. Okay, I don't know how much time I've got, so I'm going to...
Maybe just a minute or two.
A minute is all I need. I'm going to just put a little pitch out here for this little handout I prepared. It's something you could use in a classroom or in a small organization, in your own thinking, in your own house, to go through and learn some of these concepts and think about how to use them. So here's one little exercise out of there. I said, let's discover what we mean by resilience. And I ask you to rank these things in terms of them being from least to most resilient. And I don't think there's a perfect answer to this, but it's a great discussion starter, and it gets you thinking about what do I think resilience is, and what does she think it is. Another exercise is what we call the forks in the road of life. It turns out that you are going to have shocks in your life. A lot of times you don't know when, but there are some shocks you actually do know when they're going to happen. And they don't have to be destructive, they just have to be sort of a question of, what's going to happen next. So here you are in high school, and you might have had this fork in the road where you said, gee, should I go to college or should I go to trade school? All right, so you make a decision, right? And then you get out of college, what should I do? Should I go to grad school? Should I get a temporary job? Should I travel? Right? Fork in the road. Now you know those forks are coming, so those are things you can plan for, and when you're planning for those forks, you're building your resilience. So let's say that your options after high school graduation or college graduation are to go to grad school or to go to grad school in another state, to get a job that's on a career path, or to take a temporary job. Well, you can go through here and check off, okay, which of those choices do I need a resume for? Which of those choices do I need a GRE score? Which of those should I make a visit to another city? Which of those do I need to pay off my debts? And all of those things, and that's resilience planning in a sense, because you're addressing the shocks you know are going to come, you're preparing yourself, so you're ready to go. Another example, just really to show you that this can become more abstract. This is what I call an extremal cascade, and the projector's not doing me justice, but this is something I put together when we were doing the Campus Carbon Action Plan. You think about carbon for transportation, right? It kind of boils down to say, well, how many trips am I going to take, and how far am I going to travel, right? So those two things together, number of trips times the distance that you go is the carbon you spew. But it turns out that sometimes the number of trips can be really nasty as an effect on carbon. So for instance, if you take a lot of luxury trips, or you take multiple trips just for the fun of it, you like to go for a Sunday drive for no good reason, well, that's some number of trips, but in a sense you're making it worse than it has to be, versus taking some number of trips, you're avoiding low priority trips, maybe you're able to carpool, you're able to combine trips. Well, those trips are better, smarter trips, because they create a better outcome in terms of carbon emissions. And then you can multiply that by the distances that you choose to travel. So, if, for example, you take a trip, but it has very poor navigation, you get lost, you end up driving twice as far, that's a trip, sure, but it's a bad trip from the standpoint of carbon. And then there might be other trips you take that have better navigation, or you decide to drive if it's less than 450 miles instead of flying. That's probably a smarter way to take that trip. So these things all add up so that you can come up with a whole diagnosis of what's the best case outcomes here and what are the worst case outcomes, and then you can design your life accordingly. And this would help add to resilience in society by protecting us from carbon emissions and things like that. All right, so there are other, 6 or 7 other exercises like that in the little workbook. So conclusions are that basically a question of resilience, to me, and people who talk about this all the time, is that it's really a systems approach. You're looking at all kinds of interconnections of things. You're trying to diagnose that in a way that allows you to take into account the dynamics of the system and the scales at which things are going on. And then the conceptual elements we talked about are things like thresholds, the notion of a collapse that could be reached by accident. That crazy lazy 8-figure thing is called a panarchy. There are cycles in the system, and it all exists at multiple scales, and complicates the business of resilience planning, but on the other hand creates opportunities to connect revolutionary people with innovators and to be informed by memory of the system. And the strategies that we have, how do you achieve resilience? It's through diversification, it's through adaptation, it's through communication. This has been well studied in the healthcare community, building resilience there. And through incorporating interdependence. And we saw Arturo Sandoval, again, yesterday talking about this, creating cooperatives. Well, those are very resilient approaches to community well-being. And then the workbook is available. I've got a few hard copies, but Stephanie told me I could get this out digitally if people want that. So, thank you.
Nelson, would you like the lights on?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if we're to stand. This is totally new for me. So when I prepared my presentation, I wasn't coming from this perspective. I was coming from the perspective of the experience of the work that I do within the farm worker movement in the organization that I work in, CATA, the Farm Worker Support Committee. And CATA is a membership-driven organization, mostly of migrant undocumented workers who are mainly from Mexico, many of them indigenous, from Oaxaca, Chiapas, northern Guatemala, the Caribbean, Dominicans, and Puerto Ricans. In terms of the concept of resiliency, in the context of what we used to use it, is we call it the imperative to survive. Resiliency as a way of responding to this imperative that whatever is going to happen, you're going to do whatever it takes to survive. So that's what we do. Our membership, after in some point in time in their life, have taken the decision that they were going to do whatever it takes. So for most of them, that means is that they have, at the moment in time, decided to leave their communities from wherever they live, and when they do that, it's because they are in a moment of hopelessness. They are in a moment in which they don't have any other alternative. They are in a moment that it's either I stay here, I'm going to die, or I leave and do whatever it takes because my family is suffering. So if my family is suffering, then what is the value? So I wanted to make clear that's the point of view. The other aspect I wrote to present is that they move north to a place where they find work and work as a way to earn income to live. No? But what happened? The way the food system works in the United States is a way in which it's built on a plantation system. It is a way in which uses human beings as a commodity, and as such, then they take them, use them, discard them. So that goes against the concept of survival. I have to apologize, no, because I am trying to change what I was going to say, given the time constraint that I'm trying to work. And to mix all of that is the other concept that I want to highlight is that when you come, imagine this, when you decide that you have to leave your home community, you have to move to cross the border if you're in Guatemala, or you have to cross the US border if you're in Mexico. What happens is that journey, you're facing bandits, you're facing police, you're facing all kinds of people that are going to take advantage of you as you're going to move along. So you're doing it. If you know what many of our members do, especially women, they take contraceptives before leaving, because they know that when they're going to be traveling, there is a high chance that they're going to be raped. Okay. So they know that, and they take that action as a preventive action in order to avoid any kind of a problem. So that's the extent of the situation, the aspect of that. So when they cross the border, it's not that they, I crossed the border, I'm okay. No, that's when really the challenges begin. So they move to farms in New Jersey, and then they face the crew leaders, who are the overseers of the plantation system. Remember that. They are the ones that are going to put you under pressure, that you have to work, and you have to maintain that grueling pace for whatever long it takes, from sunup to sundown. Right? So as you go along, then you find that you don't have choices. Well, you're limited in your choices that you have, and you cannot do too much about it. So for most, because you are a criminal, you are in the United States documents, so you don't have recourse for remedial action. So you are and that vulnerability exposes you. If you are being exposed to pesticides or not being paid or whatever, you don't have too many options. So then, given that circumstance, the only way that you have as a choice is to move in order to survive from one farm to another farm. So it's an imperative that is going. So I want to introduce the concept that that imperative to survive is a concept of survival, and it is a concept of resistance. That you don't drop and you die. You continue on and you fight to survive. So it is a concept of resistance. In our terms, what we use is a resistance to domination, because you are being pushed. Those people who have to leave their communities in Mexico, they did it because they were displaced, because they could not find work, because NAFTA destroyed the whole setting of those communities. So they were forced to leave. So that they were under an influence of an external decision that affected them. But then they resist and move on, and they are alive. And they are doing it when you ask, because they are fighting for their families. Por mi familia is the terms. So you remember that. So it's a form of resistance. Your chart there, there's some similarities over that. But then, so I want to cut short, no? The issue is that we need, in terms of the comparison to a thriving community, that those circumstances that are faced by our membership, farm workers, who are migrants here living in the United States as undocumented, that's not conducive to a thriving community. That's not conducive for you to have a livelihood that you feel dignified. That is not conducive to a life in which you feel that you and your family are going to have a hope, so that you will be moving from hopelessness to hope. So those are challenges that we are facing at this moment. Thank you. And those challenges are in terms of something to be achieved. So it's not that we're saying that has been achieved. So, for example, in the context of today, immigration reform, we don't think that immigration reform is going to enable people to have a better way of life. Because what we think is that it's another medium for them to continue the struggle for survival. The challenge is how we can change that hopelessness that were motivating them to move and do the things that they needed to do, to a point of position of hope. So as in terms of that hope, what are the things that they can do in order to empower themselves? So to use immigration also as a venue in the context of farm workers, and in terms of the way agriculture is done today, as CATA, we are promoting that organic farming is the future. But organic farming, the values that leave out workers, is not the future. So our fight is to integrate workers' rights into the set of values of the farming community, because then it will become holistic, no? So, and that means a change in value, and then when we are able to achieve that, then we have only reached the conditions in which we can expect to build a better life for everyone. So yeah, I have to apologize because I was ready for a different kind of presentation, but then I have to improvise. So but that in essence is the message. The resistance is a resistance for survival. How can we change that imperative to survive to one imperative for hope that will help us build a new and better society. And that's the work that we do in CATA.
Thank you.
Did you want the lights dim?
Yes, please. That's the one. I'm here to talk to you about mosquitoes today. So why am I going to talk to you about mosquitoes? Last year, in 2012, was the worst year for mosquitoes in 30 years. The year started off amazingly odd. And it's not just our area. It's not my little corner of Colorado that we had this problem. This is something that's occurred over 40 states in the United States last year. You may not know last year where you swatting more mosquitoes. Our concern here, our concern here is West Nile virus. West Nile virus began on the east coast of the United States and came into Colorado in about 2007, moved through, and when it moved through, a number of people became infected to the point that they had neurological problems or non-neurological problems. It depends on whether you got sick and feverish and almost died versus whether you were just ill for a day or two. Now that pattern from this virus here, next slide, is this Culex mosquito. Now we have like 28 kinds of mosquitoes just in our area of Colorado. There are 3 of them that are Culex, and these are the ones that carry West Nile virus and can transmit it to you. This mosquito here will feed on birds, and this is an example here of an altricial bird, the ones that sit on a nest with their mouth open saying, "Mom, feed me." And as they're sitting there, they become engines for producing this virus. And a mosquito will come by, see this little mosquito with his mouth open saying, "Feed me," and the mosquito's going, "Feed me," and he goes and he gets blood from this bird. And it's when the virus gets from a mosquito to the birds or from the birds into the next mosquito that's feeding on it, it amplifies the West Nile virus in these bird populations. And it's this action right here that generates the West Nile virus that's going to allow this mosquito to attack people. Now it can attack 2 groups of people. It can attack young kids, it can attack older kids, it can attack young adults. But the number of these people contracting neuroviruses is very low. It's these people who are more subjected. At the age of 50 years old, your chances of getting West Nile virus have just gone up. When you're 55, it's up higher. 60, it's up higher yet. 70, it's even higher. Where most of the mortality is going to be seen in these people right here. This is the problem of West Nile virus. It's this generation cycle that's happening here, amplification with occasional biting of people. Next slide, please. What's happening here? The mosquito's sitting in water, in a pond. He's harmless. There's 4 larval stages where you can take them in your fingers and squash them and laugh. They go through one pupal stage and now they come out and they're looking for food. So these are now flying from the time of first bite. If the first bite is a bird with West Nile virus, this guy becomes loaded with West Nile virus in 7 to 10 days, depending on the outside temperature. He's over there cooking, making a lot more of these things. He's there generating West Nile virus to infect more people or other birds. This is how this works. Now, after 10 days or so, they become virulent. Next slide. So what we're having here is these mosquitoes are generating the blood from vertebrates that may have West Nile virus, and depending on the outside temperature, this cycle gets faster and faster and faster and faster. Next slide. Here is the solar energy accumulation. So we're going to ask ourselves, how fast is this happening in our environment? when does this tell us when we have to worry? Because you can see here in 2012, the total temperature accumulation is a lot higher. It's happening faster and earlier, faster, earlier, faster, earlier. Now, we're a mosquito district, and what are we trying to do? We're trying to preserve the integrity of the people in our community. We don't want them to get West Nile virus. Next slide. Here's the temperature in April 21st going all the way to the 27th. This is 2011. This is the daily accumulation of energy, the solar energy. And now watch how it changes with the next year. A little more energy, huh? These mosquitoes are cooking. They're over there turning out viruses as fast as possible. Okay, what are we doing? We're sitting and watching TV, scratching our nose, because this is way earlier than we ever start. Last year was so warm, we weren't prepared. And all we were doing is waiting until ending of May, beginning of June, maybe middle of June, depending on the mosquito district, to go out and start getting those mosquitoes because they're not here yet. But we didn't know, they were already out there cooking. Next one. Here's the hourly temperature during the day. This is 2011. This is what we should have been expecting. Highest temperature is 70 degrees. It's usually around 55 or 50 degrees. Let's see what it was last year. It was almost 80 degrees. Did we know it? No. We just took our shirt off, we started getting our tans, we were getting all ready for the year. And little did we know, so were the mosquitoes. They were getting their tans, they were cooking viruses, they were getting ready, and they were nailing us. Okay, next. This is the 2 years. The accumulations in 2 years. It's this difference here that we weren't detecting because we weren't out there looking every day for trends and temperatures. Next one. Here's the day it started, I think. April 21st. You can see the accumulated temperature just shoots up like a rocket. And all during this period, we're cooking mosquitoes. We're getting them going. We're getting them amped up. Next one. Compounding this now is another facet of how the climate works. This is the accumulated precipitation. Here's the April. Where's the rain? There's no rain. What happens when there's no rain? We irrigate. And we irrigate to beat the band. We make ponds and ponds of water and fields to grow our crops and that grow mosquitoes. So here we are, making them grow faster, and we're giving them more habitat to grow in. Last year was a bad year. Did we realize it? No. Okay, next slide. So let's look at the numbers of mosquitoes by year. These are the neuroinvasive, that's the bad kind. This is the other milder kind. This is the total number for the year. This is the number of deaths. Now that's the trend for just Colorado. 2012, phenomenal numbers. 2011, this is when it came through the first time. 621, 2000, almost 3,000 mosquitoes when it came through the first time. And the next time it moves through, we get a little different numbers. We get 5,387. That's a little jump in numbers. Look at the years in between. Low numbers, very low numbers. Look at the number of virulent forms. In the USA, there were 243 people who died from West Nile virus last year. 243. Years before, 43, 43, 32. 243 people died? Next one. Let's look at the trend in the United States. I told you this is not my problem. My problem is a problem in Colorado, but this is a national problem. There were 40 states in the United States who showed high numbers of West Nile virus. 40 states. This is not something that happened in Colorado. This happened all through the United States. And look at Texas. 1,739 people came down, and to get to that stage, to get to this and that stage, you have to have 2 confirmed problems in your immune system that fit the pattern of West Nile virus. This is not something you can just put your finger on your head and say, yes, I have West Nile virus. It has to be confirmed through 2 specific lab tests. They have to be done by a hospital that's looking for West Nile virus. Okay, next slide. So this is the pattern of West Nile virus. This is a really hard graph to see, but it's spread widely across the U.S. This is from CDC. Next slide. Here's Texas. I live there, 22. I win! I had more people sick in my county from West Nile virus than anywhere else in the state. If you go east of the mountains, the numbers are low. This is one of the problems with West Nile virus. We're a big agriculture belt. That side's drier, wrong side of the mountains. Okay, next slide. So let's look at the total number of mosquitoes with West Nile virus. Now what we do is we have a trap that looks like an umbrella, and what it does is it has a little fan in it and a little trap that collects mosquitoes, and then we take the 2-gallon thermos, drill holes in the bottom and put dry ice in it and hang it over the top. What's really cool is then you hang it, and what the dry ice does is it slowly sublimates. It goes from a solid to a gas. The gas is CO2. I just gave you a bunch of CO2. And those mosquitoes use that CO2 to find you. And then as they get close to you, they use the heat from your skin to get even closer yet. That's the strategy mosquitoes use to find you and start swapping spit with you to get West Nile virus. So what we do is we take 20 or 30 of these traps a week, hang them in our 50 square mile area, and use that as an indication of what the population numbers are of these mosquitoes. These are the results from 3 years. And if you notice, 2012 is not the highest in the last 3 years. In the last 3 years, when we had hardly any cases of West Nile virus, we had fewer mosquitoes. Wait, that doesn't make sense. You'd expect more mosquitoes. You'd expect 5 times the number of mosquitoes. But no, we got less. 2011 had more mosquitoes. It had way more mosquitoes. It had 600 mosquitoes and 30 traps versus, 350. So it's not the number of mosquitoes that was doing us in. Now, you guys could probably feel really good that this is good. There's somebody out there looking out for your health. Wait, man, I'm telling you what happened a year ago. We weren't out there with a finger on the pulse finding this as it was happening. This is an afterthought. We're historians. We're not the people in the field protecting your health. We're trying to find out what happened to you last year. Okay, those doctors don't do that. Those are morticians that do that. Doctors don't. Okay, next slide. These are total numbers of mosquitoes. And you can see total number of mosquitoes again. 2011, 2012 we started out with a lot more mosquitoes at the beginning of the year. Everything else was a lot lower. And then around 31, which is probably sometime in July, you see it switches. So something was happening right here that caused mosquito densities to shoot through the roof. And we weren't ready. We were sitting there scratching our head, waiting for the next year to begin. That's not called mosquito management. So what we learned last year is that we've got to wake up a lot earlier. We have to start censusing these things earlier. Even though our traps are going to be empty, that's a good sign for you. It saves us product. Now, how do we kill a mosquito? Next one. We don't do that. Okay, pesticides are nice, but that's the wrong time to get them. The time to get them is with a little hammer when you're still in the water. Now, I'm kidding about the hammer. You want to kill them when they're in the water for about 10 days of development, when they're going through 4 instar stages and then ultimately going to a pupal stage. They rise out of the water and hatch into a beautiful adult mosquito, and that's when they bite you. But as soon as they come out of the water, your job of killing them becomes a lot more difficult. If it's sitting in water, growing up to be a flying mosquito, we can add baits called a Bacillus thuringiensis israelii. It's a little bacteria, you put it in the water, these mosquitoes filter feed and they eat, they get this thing in their gut and it kills the mosquito. So when they're young and in the water and they're hiding and developing, it's the time to get them. Okay, when was the best time to do it for those other guys? We weren't started work yet. Once they get out of the water, then this is your strategy. And again, this is the wrong strategy, because to do 50 square miles with a truck spraying stuff, you're going to be inhaling this stuff. This is what we want to avoid. You know what we want to avoid more? Next slide.
I do have about a minute.
Okay. That's what we want to avoid even more. This will kill more mosquitoes over an area than a truck will, but it'll also deliver more pesticides for people to breathe. So you can see the problem with this. This is not a local problem. This is a national problem. Each district has different strategies of how they're going to try to kill these mosquitoes. Some will say we go for the larvae. Some will say we go for the adults. Some will say we don't spray. Some will say we spray. Now this problem here may be starting again this year. Still a little bit too early to tell about the temperature in the air. But you guys are in your local environments are going to have to play a role in helping your local people decide what's the strategy to reduce these numbers. What's the strategy that we use to protect your health, your children's health, and primarily your grandparents and older people. So I'll tell you a story, but you've got to help with the action. This is the story. Thank you.
Richard, did you want to go ahead? Can you try to keep it to about 10 minutes?
Yeah, if you could just.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Richard Brandt. I'm the co-founder of Dragon Farm at South Valley Academy and the director of the Youth Food Action Project. Dragon Farm at South Valley Academy started out as a student senior action project in 2006 and 2007. We're a service learning school. We send kids out into the community every Thursday. Seniors, when they get to their senior year, they identify a dilemma in the community, research it, and implement a project that will hopefully address the issue. A former student at South Valley Academy, after he did his research, he learned that there was an extremely high rate of type 2 diabetes in the South Valley, as well as obesity. And he wanted to start a farm at the school that would serve as a learning model for the community, the faculty, and the students. He heard that I had a background in gardening. I come from a family of farmers. I grew up in the South Valley, which was once the richest agricultural community in the state. My family ended up in New Mexico during the tuberculosis epidemic. And on my dad's side of the family, my grandfather leased 10 acres. And actually down the street from South Valley Academy, where the principal lives, my grandfather actually leased 10 acres in that area. And my dad used to tell me stories where they would take the produce on a horse-drawn cart down Blake Road, down a sled, and end up over there near La Vega and Bridge. And so this kid had heard that I had a background in gardening and asked that I be his community partner. Well, you know, my background is in community mural painting. And I mean, I look like a typical farmer, right? And so I was teaching art at the time, and I agreed to be his partner, his community partner, and it's really amazing how this has really transformed my life and where it's brought me here to speak with you guys today. I was actually to speak at a different panel discussion this morning, but there was a mix-up about the time, and so they placed me on this one, but I feel that what we're doing with our program is very appropriate for what we've been talking about. Essentially, the program started based around health and nutrition, and then it just has all these different webs where it's just expanded into all these different directions. We're currently funded through a USDA Community Food Project grant, and the program, like I mentioned earlier, is called the Youth Food Action Project. Essentially, students from South Valley Academy work with students from UNM Research and Service Learning Program, implementing gardens at other schools and other districts in Albuquerque. We're working in the Southeast Heights and also in the Martineztown district. Go ahead. Dragon Farm at South Valley Academy is a 1-acre, all-natural, pesticide-free farm. No herbicides or pesticides. That's what Dragon Farm looked like in 2006. That's what it looked like last summer. It operates on a lot of different levels: health, nutrition, marketing, and team building. There's also environmental issues that we look at. We're teaching, with this program, we're teaching people how to build soil in a healthy way. We have, in this country, we are reliant on large-scale industrial agriculture, which is failing before our very eyes. We're talking, Bruce was talking about systems breaking down. It's happening right now. The environment has been polluted with pesticides, genetically engineered plants, that are sprayed with Roundup-ready poison. And so what we're doing right here is teaching these youth how to build soil in a sustainable way without using any man-made fertilizers. And so right there, what they're doing is tilling some beans, and then the next day we planted it with hairy vetch, which is a legume that builds nitrogen in the soil. We are one of the few schools in the country where food grown on the campus is served in the lunch program. Thank you. And let me tell you, that was a big step, just dealing with environmental health, Bernalillo County health inspectors, and so this whole thing has been a very interesting challenge. South Valley green chili, talked about building soil. So that's what it looked like in stage 1, stage 2, and 4, or 3. And so we have this lush, it almost looks like a golf course, and that's the best way, natural way to build soil. Spring preparation. There's our Dragon Farm tractor. Kids learn about water conservation. They also learn about the water rights. We are a school that we do have water rights, and so we water part of the farm traditionally with flood irrigation. The little ditch back here runs off the Autonol Main, which is one of the oldest acequias in Albuquerque. It's also, the thing that's neat about this program, and we were talking about systems breaking down. When I was a kid, growing up in the South Valley, there was in the 70s, we didn't have parks. Our playground was on the acequias or the ditches. And so we'd leave in the morning on our bikes, ride, go through different neighborhoods, come home for lunch, go back out and come back home at night. Nowadays, some of my students, Jeremiah right there is a former student of mine who's now one of my interns. He's a gentleman that's operating the slide projector. You get me going on video games and computers and stuff like that, and I sound like an old man. And I think nowadays kids are suffering. We talk about ADD, ADHD. Well, here's one that we really have. It's nature deficit disorder. Kids don't get outside anymore, and so that's what one of this program, one of the components, what it's about. This kid right here, the thing that's neat about this kid is about 5'2" and about 110 pounds. It takes mental toughness to make it through this summer program. We were out there at 95, during the summer, it was 95 degrees one afternoon, and I had the kids go ahead and take a break, and all the skaters took off on their skateboards, and then, they go off into their different groups. And he asked me, "Mister, is it okay if I keep working?" And I'm like, "Yes, go ahead, And the thing that's cool about this program is in athletics, you have stronger kids who excel. Agriculture brings every kid to the same level. And it gives them the opportunity to rise to the occasion and serve as leaders. Essentially, one of the things that we're doing with this program is there was a former teacher at the school who actually voted, we're a teacher-run school at South Valley Academy, and who actually voted against the program at one time. And so I took him aside later, and I was like, "Well, what's up with you? What's going on here?" He's like, "Well, I grew up on a farm, and I want kids to go to college." And I said, well, that's not what this is about. I'm not trying to turn every kid into a farmer. I'm trying to teach kids to work together, because they are inheriting a mess that we have left through irresponsible living, and they're going to have huge environmental issues to deal with when they're adults. This food system is collapsing, and we have a country that's full of unhealthy people, and more people are getting unhealthy. They say that 1 in 3 kids born after the year 2000 is at high risk of developing type 2 diabetes, and what's even more alarming, 1 in 2 minorities. And so the best way to teach kids is to have kids teach kids. The student serves as the teacher. It's also about team building. One of the things that's been neat about this program, that this program brings kids together that normally wouldn't socialize with each other at school in a social setting. Entrepreneurship. We're teaching kids how to make money in a socially conscious way. These are some trees that we had this idea that, well, maybe we could grow some potted trees to sell to landscapers. That was in 2008. And that's what they look like now. So if anybody wants to rent a live holiday tree next year, attended, where they can work independently. Again, kids working together in a group. We also do beekeeping. And like I said, it's about growing leaders. This morning we marched in the Cesar Chavez Parade. 2 years ago we were out there. You could see City Councilman Ray Garduno and Martin Heinrich, Congressman Martin Heinrich, walking with these kids. And so it's about them also about getting them out of their comfort zone on the other side of Bridge Street. Working with little kids, sharing your knowledge with little ones. Outreach, Whole Foods has been good to us. That was our compost drive. Tours, kids from Belen, all the way from Valencia came out. We taught them how to spread row cover. And the whole point was, we can't do this by ourselves. We're going to have to work as a team to do this. Mentorship. This young man started the farm with me when he was 15. Now he's a junior in college. He's going off to a dig in Belize this summer. Marketing component, prepping for the market. Testing the produce. That's what it looks like before we go to the market. So if any of you ever go to the downtown growers market and you're there at 7 o'clock, we get up at 4:30 to get ready. We also have support from UNM Service Corps now. That's one of my interns. Commissioner Stebbins, again, Ray Garduno. Well, that kid was really dedicated to Dragon Farm, and she tattooed her face like a dragon. That's what my living room used to look like on a Friday night before we had refrigerators. We have some beautiful produce. Whole Foods has reached out. They want to purchase from us. That's like what we harvested last year. There was some of our records right there. 222 pounds of tomatoes, 211 pounds of onion, 555 pounds of eggplant. Workshops and celebrations. Prepping food. Kids learn how to cook the stuff as well. What do you do with the eggplant? Well, we're going to show you. Working at other schools, that's at Highland High. We implemented an edible courtyard at Highland High, Wilson Middle School, and Kirtland Elementary. And now the next school is Youth Build. We hope to be working with Karen in the future as well. Kirtland Elementary, we teamed up with the UNM School of Architecture so that those students had a real-life experience designing and then implementing some of this stuff. This is what we call the handicapped accessible garden, so that kids in wheelchairs could access these planter boxes, which were made out of recycled pallets. We have trellises back here that were made out of bicycle rims. We're currently implementing an art garden at South Valley Academy with similar components in it. Compost bin. And leadership, And You know, and so when we first started talking, when they were talking, well, I'm going to be placed on this panel, I was like, God, resiliency, you know, and I was like, well, that's perfect, because everything that we're trying to teach these kids ties in with what Bruce was talking about earlier. And it has been a long, incredible journey. Bruce and I met at an Earth Day event at the co-op in 2007, and yeah, it's just amazing where both of our programs have gone since then. You know?
Congratulations, man, that's great.
All right, well, thanks.
Okay, good after, is this still actually open? Okay, I was just wondering, I just want you guys to like move your chairs and get in a circle, because I didn't bring a PowerPoint, so I'm thinking we're just gonna like look at each other for the next 10 minutes. So if you get really quick, just stand up, move your chairs and make a circle around the PowerPoint thing. That's okay. So I'm Navajo on my mom's side, I'm Lakota on my father's side. I'm the Salt clan, and I just wanted to like address you in that way because I think that speaks to one of the higher levels of resiliency that you were mentioning earlier around culture and tradition. So basically, if you're a Navajo person, it's a matriarchal society, and so we recognize each other through our mother's side. And I won't go into the whole history of how clans are established, but in a community, once you recognize yourself through your clan, it helps you recognize kinship. So there's automatically some sort of connection within a community, a family, an organization, could be a school, it could be pretty much anything, right? So that's one way. And I think that speaks to this idea of reconnecting. And when you were talking earlier, Bruce, about like having some sort of really intense, or I can't remember what the words you said, but something that disrupts something, or shock, right? So when I think of like Native American communities, not only in New Mexico, but just like nationwide or indigenous communities, I mean, there's some really specific shocks that we could like point to. And a lot of them, you know, come back to this idea before there was any contact with, you know, westernized culture. You can talk about boarding schools, you can talk about relocation, assimilation, all the different policies that were put in place that were really specifically targeted to remove people, right, from their land base, to remove them and also kill them off. I don't want this is not going to be that much of a downer, I promise. I'm going to get to the point here in a second. Or to take away their language, culture, thus taking away their sense of self, their belonging, and their identity. And so what I do is I've been a teacher. I grew up here in Albuquerque, and I was a principal on the Navajo Reservation for a little while, worked in Marin County for a little while. But about 8 years ago, had the pleasure of working with the community in Albuquerque to create a small school called the Native American Community Academy. And basically the mission of our school was to engage a community to create a school that supports students from adolescence to the time they go into adulthood and all aspects of who they are, so that they're academically prepared for higher learning, that they're secure in their identity, and they're healthy. Okay? So those are the three things that we focus on. When I think about the topic of resiliency, I think about there's things that are really specific that we do in our school that I think support that idea, but what I think about is this longer term kind of idea of survival and how survival has played out, whether it's a story that you can connect to through your own family or your own community. But for us, I think, in establishing the school, one thing we wanted to do was look at all of this data that's really super negative about Native American students, right? That they have the lowest academic achievement, that they have the highest dropout rate, things that we would hear or see, stereotypes, things around suicide rates, what we really asked ourselves is like, what can we do proactively in order to prevent that from happening to our students? So as we were going through this process, there's two things that happened. One was just literally connecting with people on an individual basis and a collective basis to have this conversation. The other thing that happened was that we started to have some more targeted conversations, and really what it came down to, from like talking to over 150 different people, aging from people who'd been in high school, who had dropped out of high school, people who'd gone to law school, people who had become doctors, people who had become like, it's kind of like this model of success, right? And what was interesting, whether they grew up on the reservation or off the reservation, is everybody kind of pointed back to like some point in time where they felt like they had to depend upon finding some sort of strength that may help them, I guess, persevere through some sort of shock or, I guess, tragic moment in their life. So for some of us, that wasn't until college. For some of us, it was when we were growing up. For some of it was a loss of a very significant person in our life. It just really depended. But as we got to like I guess the core of what that was, is it really came back to this idea of being a whole person and having a strong sense of identity. So when we talk about holistic wellness at our school, what we're really talking about is like this idea of students' like intellectual development, their social emotional development, their physical development, and then also their connection to their community and relationships within that community. So if you envision like a circle, right, there's this thing we call the NACA wellness philosophy. That's the foundational piece of what our school is based upon. We feel that as our students enter into middle school, if you think about when you were in middle school and all those great things that went on and how you felt and you were trying to find yourself, trying to make those connections and how secure you felt, is that we really felt like if our students could understand the idea of holistic wellness as a sixth grader, how much better served are they going to be for the rest of their life, right? So we're thinking, we're not just a school looking at maybe a single measure, or a school that's looking to send kids to college or send kids to career. What we're really looking at is like rebuilding a community where there was none. Like if you think of Albuquerque, this urban kind of setting, people who have been displaced, communities that have been fragmented, and things that have been taken away, such as language and culture. But bringing all of those strengths that are not necessarily things that are written in textbooks, not necessarily things that you would see or you can pick up or wrap your hands around, but bringing that into our school. And from that, I think that our students have been able to both kind of get a stronger sense of self, but have this longer term vision of having a connection to their community, being of service to their community, and find some sort of passion that gives them hope, which you were talking about earlier as well, to think about the long term. When I worked on the Navajo Reservation, I found that sometimes our students didn't have that sense. They had a great, I want to say, kind of this like obstacle or reluctance against being able to see a future or being able to cast a vision for what they wanted to do. And so I think that that's a key part of what we ask our students to do, is really be visionaries of their own kind of like destiny in a sense. We think that we don't think about the 40-minute kind of like, class. We don't think about the 40-day, unit or 40 whatever. We really think about like this like 40-year trajectory and this sense of family and community. And so that's what we're shooting for. Our students have been found in a measurable kind of like, I guess, way that they do demonstrate a higher sense of resilience than other Native students. I'm not entirely sure what that's attributed to. However, I think the integration of core values that we have identified as a community is one place. The integration of reconnecting through language. We have a Lakota language, Navajo language, Tiwa language program, Spanish as well, where students are learning a language that really ties back to themselves. So as easy as just saying, Yate, Shikara, Baba, Yinishe, right? Ashin, actually, Ashin is like, so my name is Kara Babra, and I just basically identified who I am, where I'm from, and so I did this SALT plan, which I could study for the rest of my life. So it's something that I think is both like intellectually engaging, but also so personally significant that you can't help but survive, right? The power of reconnection when you've lost something, or the power of identifying something, what's been taken or you've never felt for a lot of our students, I think is kind of that transformational piece that gives them their strength, their resilience, and their sense of, I want to say, drive or passion. The things that we do in the sense of like understanding history is really
through indigenous perspectives, asking our students to think about kind of their local community, their family, our school, from there, their tribe, whether it be in New Mexico or not, and then this idea of indigenous people in general within the entire world. So we kind of, in the last 8 years, have established a school with like, I think we started like 80 students, 80 families. From there, it grew to about, we have like 390 students now. We had our first graduating class last year. Many of the students who were there went on to other schools, like everything from the University of New Mexico to Cornell College, Stevens University, Lawrence University, Yale University, Brown, just a variety of different things. As we hear back from our alumni, what we hear is that they feel like our school prepared them to have a strong sense of self, a strong sense of identity and purpose. And I'm like, oh my God, that's so I think the rest is pretty easy from there. What we also see is this kind of connection to a deeper commitment and a sense of purpose, which I think is really, really, really amazing. The other thing that I think that has been really a strength in trying to identify like students and why they have been able to thrive, I guess, instead of just survive, is this sense of community. And so a lot of times we'll hear our students or families say, you know, this is the place I feel like I belong, this is my community, and our students will say it's like we're family. And so I think that there's a strong kind of connection to, or I guess validation of what you were talking about, this idea of relationships. So, you know, if I were to think about resiliency, I don't know if I would call that, like name it in our school, like this is what we do to build in resiliency, but these are the things that I think have helped our students and helped ourselves and helped even I would say the adults that work in our school and the other organizations. And if you think about policy in the 1950s and 60s, there was this piece of policy that really wanted to take not Navajo families, but Native American families from the reservation, bring them to an urban setting, and then have them survive. So you get like 3 months of pay, you get a place to live. And the idea was that people would then like reconnect to a large urban setting like Albuquerque, Chicago, Los Angeles, Oakland, and get a job and then become self-sustaining. And what it really did was create kind of these different, I guess, like slums in a sense, in some cities, really tragic kind of disconnection of people, a separation of people, and this like whole kind of, I guess, disruption to many families, on top of what happened with boarding schools. So I feel like if we can reconnect people where there was no kind of, I guess, sense of connection, and now we see other organizations that are connecting to our school as well. We see kind of this national movement around like other indigenous people or Native students and Native schools kind of doing similar things, as well as like a couple sister schools that we have now in New Zealand. And so, you know, we've had a chance to take our older students there, now they're coming to Albuquerque. But it just becomes, I think, something that's much bigger and much more, I guess, strong through each time we are able to create that kind of connection. So I think that also has helped. So it's something where we feel like, you know, there's this maybe a school in one place, but really we have a much larger kind of sense of support, and we're drawing upon the strengths that we see in our communities, and those would be, I think, community, family, language, culture, identity, and the idea of this like holistic wellness philosophy that's shared by many indigenous tribes and Native American people. So I don't know how long that took.
That was perfect. We have 3 minutes
3 minutes.
to
Okay,
answer
cool.
everybody's questions.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Okay,
Kara.
sure. No problem. I didn't know. I was trying to see. Yeah.
Are there any questions for anyone on the panel? I know that was a lot to process.
Sorry.
No, just everyone.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
great.
I have a question about West Nile virus. How do you deal with water that, I live in a sort of rural community where we have livestock, and that's standing water. What's the gestation with the wrigglers, we call them? I mean, how long do we have? We try to drain our standing water, but you said you could add something. What if livestock ingest that additive, ingest that additive?
That wouldn't hurt them, because the gut of a cow is like ours.
Or horse?
Yeah, that's not a problem. Another strategy you can have is every 5 days, pour the water out for until you look in there and there's no more wigglers, then fill it up again.
How long does it take for them to mature in that stage?
Depending on the temperature, usually about 7 days. but you can see them. You
Yeah.
can walk up, and what they're gonna do is they'll be near the surface, and what they do is they breathe through like a straw, and then when they see you coming, they all go wiggle down.
That's
And
right.
you see them, and it looks like a wave. And you can look at the size of them and kind of predict how close they are to being adults of emerging. So it just takes a little bit of time for you to experience the variation in their development, and then just pour the water out on the ground, and they'll die. And then just refill it.
You know, it's tough to pour out a 50-gallon
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
sometimes, and then
Yeah.
also, we don't have much water here.
How about mosquito fish? That's what my mom used to
Well,
send me.
Yeah, you can try,
Mosquito fish.
yeah, you can try a variety of things, or you can use this bait, this bacillus. But again, it's easy if you have restricted water to see them. So if you wanted to, you can even get an old fish net from an aquarium and just go around and collect them all, throw them out, save your water. But it's gonna have to be something that it's a decision you're gonna have to make as to what's the most effective way for you to get rid of them.
Try goldfish.
Any other questions for the panel?
Gambusian mosquito fish.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question again about Nile virus. You said there was the heat and then the moisture.
Right.
And it almost sounds like you could make that into a predictive database and then feed that to local areas. Some central agency could do that.
I don't think there's a government agency or a state agency that would spend the time predicting for us users what to expect. I mean, it took
It's like
me,
on a square mile basis and,
Yeah.
and
because,
the rainwater
and it's pretty
and
intensive.
the birds and the local
If you-
birds.
It's pretty intensive if you have to go out and set traps, or if you have to go out and dip with a little cup to find out where the larvae are. And the government's not gonna spend time doing that.
Right, I think you're on the right track though, because we have a Professor Helen Wearing here at UNM in biology, and she studies dengue fever, for example, and she's doing mathematical models of the development of the larvae as an effect of temperature. So that model could be driven, so to speak, by temperature data.
You've got all the
things like
weather
that.
stations,
Yeah.
all in.
Yeah, precip,
CDC keeps track of all of that. I mean, the problem is that epidemiology is really complicated. So you can't say, like, on this given year, you're gonna have this amount, you don't know what the viral load's gonna be in the mosquitoes. But, I think we worry too much. 80% of people who get it never get sick at all. They never know we've had it. And then we have a lot of immunity because we've all been so exposed in these areas where it's always here year after year. So, the odds you get in a car wreck are a lot higher. So, I think we should be vigilant and try to do what we can, but I don't think it's like.
Well, see, his model really would track the time when you had to get the people out there to dip, and then at some point you need them out there twice a week.
Yeah, and it's a better management tool for you to go out there and address the degree of problem you have. Last year, we didn't expect that. Last year, we weren't out there looking because it never dawned on us. This is over a 30-year period that this is the first time it's happened.
I manage a mosquito program too, and we start dipping in April every year.
Okay?
Yeah.
Where are you at?
Boulder.
Are you? Okay, well, good on you. There's gonna be more places doing it this year.
What about the bird population? They have all kinds of services they provide to the ecosystem, and if they're being killed off by the virus, then
You don't find them. You don't
I found one in my
the birds.
driveway once.
Well, we had an experiment one time when I was in Virginia, Washington DC area, where the Fish and Wildlife Service went out and put 100 dead birds in a 2-acre field. And the next day, we went out looking for dead birds, and we found about 7 of them, only parts of the birds. So 93% of the birds disappeared in one evening. So if you're gonna be looking, if you're gonna use dead birds as the example of mortality in birds, you gotta ask yourself the question, how many are you
No,
finding?
that's not what I meant. I mean, for example, let's say we have cattle tanks that are breeding mosquitoes, and those
Yeah.
attack the birds.
Right.
Well, even if no humans get sick, a bunch of birds are gonna get sick, and it's going to affect the
But you won't
ecosystem.
find them. You won't find the birds.
I don't,
but they will die.
You'll find 7%.
Yeah, you'll find a couple of them, but it's not a good enough indicator of bird mortality.
I'm not looking for indicators of bird mortality, I'm trying to protect the birds from dying. I mean, if humans are modifying the landscape by putting out water tanks, I have a horse that has a water tank, well, why would I want to be putting the birds at risk for, infections? Whereas if I could go out and scoop the larvae out of the cattle tank, then I can protect the bird population.
You can
I'm-
also
I'm-
put tea in there, you can get a little
Yeah.
chocolate tea
I'm-
and toss it in.
I'm more concerned about the human mortality.
Well, I think we have reached the end of our allotted time, and so maybe we can give a hand to all of our panel speakers.